Hello there, you wiggly woos. Andy Murray here for What Culture Wrestling, and today we're going to talk about perhaps the most widely criticized group of people in all of pro wrestling. A group of people who receive torrents of abuse every single time an episode of Raw or SmackDown hits the airwaves, and we're treated to the joys of Eric Rowan leaning in front of a bit of chicken wire going coochie coochie peekaboo, or Shorty G turning up like he's waiting for his mum to take him to basketball practice, or whatever the hell is going on in this Lana, Rusev, Bobby Lashley thing at any given time. I am, of course, if you haven't guessed already, I mean, you clicked the video, you've seen the title, I'm talking about the WWE Creative team, but not in the way you might think, and certainly not in the way the internet reacts towards them whenever something goes wrong. But before we dive into it, let's put a quick little disclaimer out there. This video is not an attempt at absolving these people of all blame, because sometimes things do go wrong, and yes, sometimes it is indeed their fault, and when that happens, they should be taken to task. But I think that happens just a little too often in today's hypercritical world. So, WWE Creative then. They're just a really easy target, aren't they? It's these men and women who take the bulk of the flack whenever something happens on Raw or SmackDown that people don't like, and to be fair, they kind of make it easy for people at times. If you were to browse onto WWE's career website, for example, you would find a 3-minute video in which these reality TV writers and soap opera people glibly inform you that their experience lies in everything apart from pro wrestling, and when you see it, it's hard not to be really cynical of the whole process. But let's move away from that little sidestep for a moment and talk about the content itself, because there's a lot of stuff on Raw and SmackDown over the past few years, really, if we're being fair, that doesn't really resonate. If we're to use a recent example, how about Lana, Rusev, and Lashley? That storyline throws up at least one cringeworthy segment every single week. It has seemingly the whole internet mocking it, and really, that's understandable. It's based on cuckolding. It features a once beloved performer who fans would love to see elevated elsewhere, and it has Lana out there botching her lines and hurrying through the script every single week, delivering those promos in a manner that suggests she doesn't believe in a single word she is saying. Now, personally speaking, I actually get quite a lot of entertainment out of these segments. I think they're so bad, they're actually good, but make no mistake, so bad it's good is still bad. And when it comes to the backlash, Paul Heyman and his creative team have borne the brunt of it. And with regards to that very team, yes, it's too big. Yes, there are too many people in it. And no, there are not enough wrestling minds in there. But these people aren't the big problem here. They aren't the sole reason that these segments are so divisive. And neither is the script that they produce for Raw and SmackDown every single week, although, you know, it doesn't really help. The real problem, my very good friends, is the framework, because as incoherent as the storytelling can be and as unbelievable and inhuman as some of the dialogue can be, these are smaller problems in the grander scheme. Problems, yes, absolutely, but not the root cause. Because what WWE have effectively done over the past few years, with a few notable exceptions, Brock Lesnar, Ronda Rousey, is create a roster where everyone's pretty much on the same level and no one has anywhere to go but the middle. There's no real hierarchy, there aren't any real tiers that we can speak of, everyone's just kind of the same shade of meh, and in trying to push everybody at once, WWE have succeeded in creating a roster where nobody truly stands out, unless they're a former MMA champion, or, you know, John Cena or The Rock. Take guys like Cedric Alexander, like Ricochet, like Buddy Murphy, and presumably soon to be Humberto Carrillo. These guys have all had pushes or mini pushes started 1 month and then abandoned the next. Or how about Kofi Kingston, who slid back to the middle of the pack in remarkably quick fashion after losing the WWE Championship to Lesnar, or even Seth Rollins, whose continued push as the guy, as the top babyface, is being met with increased volumes of resentment. Now, I could dive into literally dozens of other examples from over the years, but here's the thing. There's absolutely nothing this beleaguered creative team can do without the implementation of a long-term sporting framework. The writing team have no real way of pushing and promoting wrestlers and positioning them in accordance with wins and losses because, as Road Dogg told us on Twitter back when he was SmackDown's lead writer, in WWE, wins and losses don't matter. They can't even push people in a way that corresponds with any momentum built, because in the land of 50-50 booking, momentum doesn't really mean anything and therefore can't be built in the first place. All the problem of the big man sitting at the top table who's terrified of clean wins and losses and insists that every single heel gets their heat back after a defeat. Instead of using these methods, which I do believe would go some way to solving at least a few of WWE's modern creative woes, these poor people, these poor men and women in those creative meetings are tasked with sticking to the amorphous sports entertainment framework designed by a guy who I don't think even has a grasp on what that means anymore. And increasingly in this modern era, all this framework does is normalize wrestlers because there are far too many of them. They're all in the same place at the same time and they're being presented in the exact same way. It is undisciplined in the extreme. You know, I don't quote this guy a lot, but Jim Cornette once said that if you were tasked with creating a brand new roster for a brand new promotion and you're allowed to pick 30 wrestlers, you can't really get away with picking the 30 best wrestlers in the world. You simply cannot do that because where do you go from there? Suddenly, you've made the 30th best wrestler in the world a jobber by comparison. You need tiers. You need men and women who are only there to put others over every single week. And at the other end, you need stars who sell tickets, who bring people in and stand above everyone else. And you need a middle. And the thing with WWE is that 90% of the people on that roster are in the middle and they have no real scope to move up or down. It's completely static. And as we've seen with Seth Rollins lately, even when WWE try to elevate someone, it tragically doesn't even work, despite Mr. Rollins' obvious abilities as a performer. After all, it wasn't so long ago that he was considered the fan favorite in WWE, but now he's a colder product than 3D Doritos, and yeah, he is a little bit silly on social media from time to time, but this is primarily because of the framework. Now, creative are slightly complicit in all of this, but again, they're not the root cause. The root cause here is a chairman so ravenous, so greedy in his talent acquisition methods that he is killing his own company's creativity. I understand why he does this. It's because he doesn't want other companies to have the shiny toys and he wants them for himself, which I guess is good business, but you know, it's all getting a little bit too much and creatively, it just stinks. But here's the thing about that, even NXT is overstocked and yet guys like Adam Cole have absolutely flourished there because their paths to the top are clearly defined. That brand has an exciting, effective and fresh cyclical framework. People move up, people move down, and there are clear tiers on the roster, and at the end, there's an end game greater than even the brand's top title, megastardom. But on Raw and SmackDown, the top title isn't even the end game anymore. It isn't the end game when Brock Lesnar disappears for it for weeks on end, and it isn't even the end game when a popular performer like The Fiend shows up and takes it, which is part of the problem. In the end, WWE's creative department are all victims of their employer's rank greed and single-minded, outdated, myopic focus on creating some kind of Hulk Hogan figure at the top of the card, despite that continually failing over and over and over again. And even if these writers were all creative geniuses, and some of them might well be, they wouldn't be able to absorb all this wonderful talent into a shared universe. Because the shared universe in WWE, it doesn't exist. WWE, for all the changes they've made with people like Bruce Pritchard and Paul Heyman and Eric Bischoff cycling in and out of the creative room, WWE is still a sandbox. It's a sandbox for one man. It's his yard. And no, I'm not talking about Roman Reigns or even The Undertaker. Everybody in that creative team is writing for one man and one man alone. That being Vince McMahon. They cater to his whims. Every little piece of content that WWE produce, on the main roster at least, is for him so he can laugh when they rename Chad Gable Shorty G and have Baron Corbin come out with some goof dressed as a dog mascot. And this is where much of the problems lie with WWE's creative inconsistency, and why they attract so much criticism online and elsewhere. You know, people always used to say that Vince McMahon thrives on competition, but we're now living in a world where AEW exists, and yet the main roster is still throwing out stuff like Shorty G, stuff like the Hell in a Cell pay-per-view main event, stuff like the Roman Reigns Baron Corbin feud and the Rusev Lana Bobby Lashley thing, and really, I could stand here all day listing even more. The creative staff, well, they can't effectively manage this bloated roster. They are simply staff, they're just employees working under a very strict remit. I'm sure we've all heard the countless reports from former employees of what a hellscape it is in there. The talks of ideas just been thrown out on a whim, of constant last-minute rewrites, of vetoes, of shouting matches, of everything else, creating a real sense of hopelessness for anyone who walks in the building. And, you know, if the over-the-top nature of some of these segments that get on Raw or SmackDown is anything to go by, I wouldn't be at all surprised if these workers were doing what all frustrated employees do around the world, and just crafting material to pop themselves to get a laugh in the office to ease the frustration. So, in conclusion, the company that markets every vaguely progressive women's wrestling milestone as if they've somehow just given women the right to vote in the modern world needs to exercise restraint to ease its creative malaise. But for a company as bombastic, as maximalist as WWE, who are all about the pyro, the ballyhoo, the explosions, the big broad strokes, the subtlety hammer, and everything else, is that even possible? It seems increasingly like no matter who sits in that creative meeting and no matter what kind of competition shows up, WWE's creative problems just aren't going anywhere. And you know what? It's actually a real shame, because for the best part of 2 decades, we all sat around assuming that the company's creative downturn was because they had a monopoly, they had no competition, and they were just awaiting some other company to show up, light a fire under their backsides, and when that would happen, suddenly Raw and SmackDown would be consistently great again. Maybe someday, if AEW Dynamite reaches an average of, I don't know, let's say 2 million viewers, maybe we'll see that, but I don't know, man. We've just been burned so many times before. But either way, no matter what happens, that's just my take on the matter. So as always, I'm interested to hear yours. So why not head on down to the comment section below and fire off those spicy hot takes. Now, once you've done that, you can like, share, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications. And once you've done that, you can follow us on Twitter at WhatCultureWWE, and you can find me at Andy H. Murray if you want to tell me how wrong I am. Goodbye.